So for today's session, we'll focus on personal income tax, Form S component of the system. This week we've had two other sessions. Earlier on Tuesday, we had a session on provisional tax, and today we're talking about personal income tax. On Wednesday, we also had a session on corporate income tax. During today's webinar, we are kindly asking attendees to please remain in silent mode. And the reason for that is so that we can all hear the presenter talking about the subject. So please keep your mic and your camera muted. In terms of the agenda today, very short, we'll have the introduction, which is what I'm doing now. And then we'll have a presentation talking about personal income tax. We'll have an illustration of screenshots from the system. And then we'll have a question and answer session before we conclude. So again, in terms of audio, please keep your mic muted. As shown on the screen, the first red button on WebEx, as well as your video, please keep your camera muted. Please also feel free to send us the questions you may have during the course of this session through the chat or the Q&A system, which is the blue icon as shown on the screen. And if you're asking questions, please, we request that you address your question to all the panelists. There are a number of us here, and then we'll also try and address these questions during this session today. As a reminder, please note that we are recording this presentation, and this is purely for our learning and also to identify areas of improvement. The speakers today are Mr. William Nailote and Mr. Bhavik Chauhan. They are both members of the TPOS team here at FRCS. Before we get a start on this presentation, I'd like to play a message now from the acting CEO of FRCS, Ms. Fanevave.
Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Fiji Revenue and Customs Service, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to our virtual consultation this afternoon. I thank you all for accepting our invitation and taking time out of your busy schedule to join us and engage with us this afternoon. As an organization, I want to reconfirm our commitment to customer service and transparency, which are some of the key pillars of our strategic plan for 2020 to 2024. We are focused on creating a service culture, and this virtual webinar of some of the low-lying fruits we're taking to make sure that despite the extraordinary circumstances which we find ourselves in, that work will continue, regardless of where we are in Fiji today, listening in. Due to the current coronavirus pandemic, there are restrictions obviously in place, and it's forced us to think about creative ways to engage with you, and this is going to be one of the first, if not many, initiatives to make sure that we are listening and that we're fielding questions as and when the time and need arises. The phase 2 of implementation, which is what will take place today, is on the company income tax, personal income tax, provisional tax, pay-as-you-earn taxes. We hope that you'll participate, you'll engage with our experts and subject matters on this, and more importantly, provide feedback so that we're able to design a system that works for you and works for us as well. Thank you very much. Enjoy your session and stay safe. Vinaka.
Okay, thank you everyone. I'll now pass on to William for the presentation.
Good afternoon, Pula Vinaka, and namaste to you all. To roll out our personal income tax PAYE TPOS consultations, as you see on the screen, today we are looking at PAYE Form S till the tax year 2020. And in the next sessions, this is just to give you a heads up that this is the first of a series of consultations for personal income tax. And the next one is a Form B till tax year 2020. Then we'll look at the form as new and the Form B new form, and also with this there are associated taxpayer requests that we will also. It's important for me to reiterate at this stage that with PIT, development is still in a very initial stages, and today we will just go through an illustration to show you how the process is gonna look like in when we roll it out. And it is important that we engage with you at this early stage. And also on that same note, going on to the next slide. Objective of the presentation is we will give you an overview and the major changes, and my colleague over here, Mr. Bhavik Chauhan, will go through the illustration of PIT Form S filing, and then after that we go through the question and answers. Just before I start, I want to reiterate for all those individuals that are listening, the participants, the tax agents, the practitioners that are out there, if your clients are up to date with their filing before the actual rollout online implementation, then they might not be going through this process. So, for example, if a client comes to you with outstanding obligations, then might be we'll have to go through the process. Going on to the next slide of the presentation, just some overview. I know most of you already know the Section 8 are very important in terms of a process that involves tax is the imposition section. This is the authority why we have this slide over here, and Section 13, 14, 15. So actually we are just focusing on the employment income today. In the later ones that I already alluded to before, we will go into business income, for example. In the next slide, just an overview of the PIT Form S filing, the applicable return. I will just go through the columns. The single employer registered for PAYE. So PAYE will be remitted by the employer through the employer monthly summary, and the income source, if it's a single employer not registered for PAYE, and the employee will lodge the Form S return through this process going forward. And if there are multiple employees at the same time during a tax year, then the Form S will have to be lodged by the employee also. I think it's very important for you to understand this before we go on into the presentation. Well, for the commissioner's assessment, I know most of you will be familiar with this. It will still apply for employees whose employer filing monthly MS, and employment income is from one employer. This is very important for me to highlight. Employment income is from one employer. The commissioner's assessment is still there. Going on to the next slide. Well, if you are asking who are required to file PIT Form S return, the first point there is individuals deriving income from two or more employers during the year or during the tax year, individuals whose employer is not registered for PAYE, Fiji residents who are employees of foreign organizations, embassies located in Fiji, who are not registered for PAYE. And the last point is migrating Fiji citizens or departing expatriates whose only source of income is from employment. For example, they might live during the year and they are required to do the online lodgement for the PIT Form S return. The creation of PIT Form S obligation. In TPOS, The obligation to submit forms will be created either automatically or on an ad hoc basis. Where there's 2 or more EMS files that are filed at the same time, this is where it will be created automatically, or it can be just be created by the employee when he goes in. Any individual lodging forms, the commissioner's assessment will not be generated. This is important in terms of your understanding of the system going forward. Well, the major changes, going on to the next slide. This process, as we already understand, is a manual filing. We've been on this process for a long time now. Internal processing, it comes in, and the different processes within the FRCS deals with the return until the processing of the return. When there's more than one employment, they lodge the form as return, and there's a notice of assessment after the processing of the form as return. That to be processed, definitely, this is the way we are going, online filing. It's a big shift, and there's no assessing for 2015 and future years. Self-assessment process going forward. Pre-deadline electronic filing reminders. A pre-population of individuals' employment income and PAYE, if there's already been lodged through the EMS from the employer for 1 whole year. If the EMS is not available, employee enter the employment details. If the EMS is available, it restricts the employee to decrease employment income and change PAYE details. So your question might be, if it's not correct, then employer to do the amendment, go through the amendment process, and then we can go forward with that process. The taxpayer will be able to claim a credit for withholding taxes if it's not pre-populated. And of course, once you do if you've been here for the last 2 days, the filing confirmation will come to the taxpayer portal. And before we go on, the next process, we'll go through the illustration. As I'm reiterating again, that this development is still in the very initial stage, but in terms of transparency and in terms of trust, which is a very vital component of a self-assessment system going forward, we are doing our best in terms of bringing you this illustration, and we know that it's still work in progress, and engaging you with in this early stage, we'll be able to work together in terms of finalizing and rolling out this PIT format. I'll just give it over to Mr. Bhavik Chauhan to take us through the illustration.
Okay, the PIT Form S, we will today be looking at the instructions page, followed by the determination of residency status, then the reported PAYE withholding with additional salary and wages, then the summary of tax liability page, declaration, and finally the filing confirmation. Now, in order to file your PIT Form S return, an individual is required to log into their portal using their user ID and password. Now, this filing is not just limited to the individual. If the individual has engaged a tax agent, the tax agent can also file the Form S return using their own portal. Okay. First, you will come up with the instructions page. Now, we emphasize here that the instructions need to be read out and understood. Just like other processes, you will see that there is a declaration checkbox. The system will not allow you to proceed unless and until you check the declaration box. Next slide. Okay, so after proceeding to the next screen, this is the residency status. You will see two drop-down. You will see a drop-down field. This is for residency. whereby you will get two options, resident and non-resident. You may notice that there is a table just below, which is asking for permit number, date of arrival in Fiji, expected date of departure, actual date of departure. Now, this table will only populate if you select your residency status as non-resident. Let me emphasize here that this is not a mandatory field. This field will only be entered by applicable non-residents. Now, looking at the bottom right hand corner, you will see that there is a save option button. This is a feature whereby you can save your application anytime and then pick up the application from where you left off. In addition to that, we will be adding a add note button as well. This will be done at a later stage. Okay, now we will proceed on to the next slide. This slide is basically the reported PAYE withholdings. Here you will see your income from employment, which is lost by your employer, will be pre-populated here. Looking at the table, you will see that the information there would be the TIN of the employer, name of the employer, employment income, redundancy payment, lump sum payment, SRT deducted, ECAL deducted, and PAYE deducted. Now, if you have multiple employers, you will see multiple income lines. We have also added a auto-calculated total line. Okay, where you may want to know where if your income is not shown here, there must be possible reasons that your employer may not have filed the EMS, or your employer may not be registered for PAYE. Then we have also provided you with a option to add those unaccounted salary income via the EMS system. So you will see that the table is similar. However, there are two additional columns, which are the redundancy exemption and lump sum exemption. To enter your additional employment income, you will notice that there is a add new button. When you click on this add new button, this will simply enable you to enter your employment details. Now, the TIN of employer is mandatory. So once you enter a valid employer TIN, the name of the employer will be pre-populated, and the other fields will be available for you to input your details. Now, you will also notice that there is a attachment icon. Now, for every line item, every line income, attachment is mandatory. Moving on, you will also notice that there is a dividends table. Again, to enter details of dividend received, you will be required to click on the add new button. This will enable you to enter your details. You will have to enter a valid TIN of the company, which will pre-populate the name of the company. Then you will be required to input your gross dividend and tax deducted. Again, you will be required to attach the source documents for this. Further to this, we have also provided option for other income. This basically includes pension income, total value of cash benefits received from your employer, and other income. Remember that these are all input fields. and for every input, you are required to attach a document. Just to reiterate, these mandatory documents will only be required if you enter in any of those income fields. Now we will move on to the next slide. This is the exemption income slide. Here you will see we have given you the option for dividend deduction and pension exemption. This is also an input field. You will see that there is a auto-calculated total deduction line. Then you followed by the auto-calculated chargeable income. This will be calculated by deducting the total income less total deduction, which will now proceed to the tax liability summary. In the text, you will see in the summary, it will basically give you the annual income tax liability, which will be computed from the chargeable income, the SRT liability, and equal liability for the year, followed by the total withheld income tax, SRT, and equal. These details will be picked up from the details you had provided earlier. Then the system also does a automatic calculation, basically the difference between the tax liability less the withheld tax at source. So your income tax, SRT, and equal will all be auto-calculated. Finally, with your total outstanding liability. On the form, you will also see that it will calculate your late lodgement penalty. And lastly, you will see a summary table. This will basically show your total liability for the year plus the total penalties, which will give you your total payable. And then if you have any credit available, then this will basically offset it against your total payable, reflecting your net payable. So finally, we will now proceed to the declaration page. Okay, in the declaration page, the TIN and the name of the individual login will be pre-populated. Again, you will see a declaration box. Once you select the declaration box, this will simply enable the submit button. So once you click on the submit button, you will get your filing confirmation. Okay, now we will be answering your question and answers. Okay, there is a question here. Dividend from SPSC listed companies required to be entered. Yes, this will be required to be entered. As Mr. Villimoni had advised that these are all for 2015 to 2020 returns. This feature may be available for 2021 returns and onwards, but this will only be confirmed once we go into the final consultation phase. Okay, there is another question that the totals were not calculated. Again, like Mr. Villimoni had reiterated, that these are just illustrations, as we are still in the initial stage of development. So this is just basically a snapshot of how the system will be for PITS. Again, this is just for returns 2015 till 2020. So that's why you did not see the auto calculation happening.
The next question is to do with the assessment. So no assessment means automatic acceptance. That's the question that's coming in. what we are saying is this process going forward is based on self-assessment principles, so there will be automatic acceptance, and the filing confirmation will come to your. Also, actually, what we are saying under self-assessment principle is the return is the assessment. So the next question is to do with is this an equivalent of a Form S only? What about other income, example, rental income? As I already mentioned earlier, that this is the first part of the consultation. We will touch on that issue in the second part of the series of the consultations on PIT Form B, and this is where, of course, it will be included.
Okay, there is another question. Can you have a field that all taxpayers can enter their extension numbers if they have an extension? Like we have mentioned, these are for returns 2015 to 2020. So any returns which are for past will not have an extension because they are already due for filing. For extensions going forward, this will be all automated. So the taxpayer will not be required to enter any extension number. The system is automated, and basically the filing due date will be deferred. But this will be for going forward PITS return and all other applicable returns.
The next question is to do with when is this going live? As I already been informing for this past 2 days. This is the consultation, which is starting from the front end. We are doing consultations. The development for this PIT Form S is still in the very initial stage. So this is still a work in progress, and a very important determining factor before we go live is the external testers program. So I encourage all participants, please do take on this opportunity and get involved and get engaged. And after that very important process, then the system will go live. Thank you.
There is another question. Dividends are exempt income and should not be included in the gross income. Please explain why dividends are to be disclosed and subsequently deducted as exempt income. Now, the Income Tax Act states that individuals are required to declare all sources of income. For that reason, we have given those fields, even though we know that those dividend incomes are exempt, but however, not in every year those dividend incomes were exempted. These exemptions were only applicable for certain years, and where certain years these dividend incomes were subject to tax. However, if, therefore, we have also provided the dividend deduction line, so whereby if dividends were exempted, then you have the option to exclude it from your chargeable income.
For the payday filing for EMS, actually for the participant who actually asked this question, we will reply to you. It's still under development. It's still there, still under development. Our FRCS is still working with our partners in actually developing and actually improving this payday reporting filing for EMS. So if there is any issue on that one, you can just email it over. The address that will be given at the end of the session.
There was another question. Will this return be assessed by the employer TPOS portal or individual to sign up for the TPOS portal? This is a personal income tax return for an individual, so this can only be accessed by the individual, or if the individual has engaged a tax agent, then the tax agent can file the Form S return on behalf of the individual. There's another question for employees registered for PAYE and submitting the monthly EMS. Are we required to provide the tax certificate to the employees? Yes, by law and under the labor law as well, you are required to provide a tax certificate at the end of the year.
Just to add on to that, actually by end of Feb of the next year, just to clarify on that point.
There was another question whether if an individual also has other income such as rental income. Now, for that individual will be registered as a Form B, basically a business individual. So that part will be covered under PIT Form B. Remember that this is only for an individual whose source of income is only employment income. Are there any other questions?
Maybe we take one or two more questions from the floor. You send it to us through the chat and we can address it now. We pretty much covered most of the questions that come in. So welcome in more questions.
There's another question about the sole trader business. It is still in the initial development stage, and this will be later communicated to you once we are ready.
And I think lastly, there's a compliment that's coming through the chat. Thank you so much for, I think this is very encouraging to FRCS in terms of simple and user-friendly of the formats, but we are still looking at continuous improvement. And just to keep it off, if we have any other questions, or last question is coming in now. So is there any change in the process for commissioner's assessment? When and how does she commissioner's assessment will be provided to the employees? There will be no change to the commissioner's assessment current process that is happening now in FRCS, in the process that we are moving forward into. And I hope that I've answered that question. From the question that came in, it just follows the same process that we are going on at the moment. This is process.
Just to add on to that, if an employer's commissioner's assessment has run, that employee will not be required to file a Form S. Form S is simply required to be filed by employees who have 2 or more employment income, who may be migrating during the year, and basically for expatriates who are departing, and for Fiji residents who are deriving employment income from foreign organizations or embassies who are registered in Fiji.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we'd like to end the session today. So thank you again, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, for your participation this afternoon. On the screen, we're showing our email addresses where you can contact us. So if there are questions you still have or others that you may think of after this session, please email those through to us, and then we'll get back to you individually. We have noted all the questions that have come in, and we'll any of those that haven't been answered today, we'll get back to them individually. Before we conclude, I would like to kindly request everybody, if you can please go to the survey link that's shown on the screen, so that you can provide us feedback, which will help us to improve. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. As Willie mentioned earlier, this is just a start of the process. Following this, we will also invite your good selves for testing of the system before we proceed to roll out the system. With these few words, we thank you again. Good afternoon, and stay safe. Naka.